All right, so today's the topic of, or the title of today's talk as we get here is A Course in Infinite Possibilities by Releasing the Script. So the first thing I want to talk about today, just related to that is, and I didn't even realize it even though I knew I was speaking on 9/11, is that this is the 15th anniversary of the events that took place in 9/11. And we're all familiar with those events. And, I was thinking, that is an example of the ego script, correct? It's just this, probably at this point, maybe this was for those of us in the United States, but it's one of the most significant events that took place in the 21st century. It really had an impact on us here in this country for obvious reasons. And of course, it had a lot of impact for the rest of the world because we now see that there is this, it appears to be this war between these ideas of jihadist Islam or an interpretation of Islam against, it appears, Western culture. That's one way of looking at it. So it has had kind of an impact in the world that we perceive. Maybe not as direct for most of us in our life experience. But one thing I do want to say about that and all the scripts is if you look at the Course in Miracles, it has a very interesting interpretation about the script. In lesson 158, it says this: the script is written. Now it's important to think about this in terms of language. What tense is that written in? The script is written. It's in the past tense. So what the Course is implying to us is that the events of 9/11, 2001, and even the events of 9/11, 2016, are in the past. It is the ego's interpretation of linear time that appears to be happening in the present. Now, what does that mean for all of us sitting in this room today? Well, I think what it means for all of us, what it informs us, is that we have the opportunity in every moment to take a look at our script and see what it is saying to us. The script is really the ego's interpretations of the events as they take place. It is the ego. So, the Course also says this: what does your script reflect except your plans for what the day should be? And thus you judge disaster and success, advance, retreat, and gain and loss. These judgments are all made according to the role the script assigns. So I had an example of this recently. On August 31st, it was a Wednesday afternoon. What basically happened was that a friend of mine, a good friend, one of my best friends from college, we're talking 30 years ago, right, was in town. I don't see him very much. And he contacted me the night before, and he said, hey, I'm in town. I have, he had this, block of time that he could see me. It was basically an hour in the afternoon. And it was also a good time for me to see him as well, because I had work and then I had class that night, the Wednesday night class that I facilitate here. So it was perfect timing. So I said, okay, and he told me where he needed to be. He needed to be kind of downtown on Howard Street. So, I looked up a watering hole in that area, and there was a microbrewery that was nearby, and we said, hey, let's meet, have a beer, and, let's have some good time. So we met, we said we were going to meet around 6 o'clock, so I got there around 6 or 5:45. Got there around 5:45, parked right across the street from this microbrewery, went in, we had a beer, we spent an hour together. It was a great time, good friend, talked about our 30th year college reunion is coming up. I just thought, oh wow, this is beautiful. After this, I'm gonna head to class and do class. I mean, what better? You see a great friend, and then you go to study A Course in Miracles, right? What a great evening. So as I'm leaving this establishment, I see on the wall, there's a sign. And the sign says, make sure that you take all your valuables out of your car and, don't leave anything in sight, this kind of little warning. I think, oh, isn't that an interesting sign? So I get out and I walk across the street and I get to my car and my back driver's side window has been smashed out. My seat has been pulled down. I have like a kind of a crossover SUV. And I noticed right away that my gym bag, and more importantly, my backpack has been taken from my car. And I'm stunned for a minute. I'm kind of stunned. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I just, I was stunned and then furious, right? I'm furious. So I'm like, okay, whatever, I just have to kind of get to class, So I drive back over here and, I come to class, and I think just Reverend Vincent was there that night for class. So we, talked, and we kind of mostly just talked, and we read some as well. I can't tell you what we read that night. But, it was kind of help to process it. But the other thing was, I was feeling a lot of egoic feelings. I was feeling rage, I was feeling betrayal, I was feeling judgment toward the person. I was imagining the kind of person that must have done this, And when I came home, on my way home, I just let out a yell. I just was like, ah! I was so frustrated. And I thought to myself, well, I live in that house. I live in that home, and I live in the front apartment. I have a great apartment. I have the best room. I'm sorry, Reverend Tony. I think I have the best room in the house. It has big windows. It sees the outside. You get trees. I mean, it's lovely. It's lovely. But one of the things you also get is like at 4 o'clock in the morning, you hear people coming who have been celebrating, and they're like yelling and screaming and talking. So I figured, okay, I can let out a yell. People are used to it on this block, I went into the apartment, and my other apartment mate, Reverend Tony, was there. Michael, another lovely man as part of our apartment, was there. And I said unkind words, and I was frustrated. But what was nice was those guys were just able to listen, and hear me about it. So what does all this mean? Well, by the next day, I had moved on. I allowed myself to acknowledge my egoic feelings. Yes, I felt victimized. Yes, I felt angry. Yes, I felt, betrayed. Yes, I felt rage that, in my backpack I lost my laptop that I've been using for 5 years, my MacBook Air. I lost my new eyeglasses that cost a couple $100. I lost my textbook that I use, my teacher's textbook that I used preparing for my Algebra 2 class, my grade book that I was using up till that time, and this nice backpack, So, I know what I lost there. But I just reflected upon it, and this is the ego. You see what the ego does, is the ego does these kinds of things. Think of the events that happened, that I experienced that day. I had this really big high, meeting my friend, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to meet my friend, I had a great time, maybe we'll go to 30th reunion together. And, everything just worked out really well. Then I'm going to the Course in Miracles class, and I come out, and my window's smashed, and I lose over $1,000 worth of property, And that's the ego, folks. That's the ego world. It gives you some good, and it gives you some bad, according to the world. But what I learned from this experience was that the quicker we go to Holy Spirit, the faster we move through it. A Course in Miracles has a couple quotes which are kind of profound. And one of them is, infinite patience results in immediate effects. So in that moment where something happens, that you perceive may be really not so good. The more and more, the faster we get to spirit, the faster we ask. Doesn't mean we don't go through our process. It just means that the miracle can kind of come more quickly. And so for me, the miracle, the shift that I had around that is, basically just that, I had to let things go. I had to let those things go. Now, maybe they'll come back. I filed a police report. I filed my insurance claims, all that kind of stuff. Maybe something I'll get something back, but I don't know that. It could happen or it could not. But what's more important is the immediate effects of peace, right? I can now sit up here today and talk to you about it. It's an event that happened, okay? The ego wants me to tell you to don't trust anybody, right? Don't trust those people that live in South of Market. Don't trust those people that live in the Tenderloin. Baloney. See them as the Son of God, like the lesson says this week. See them as your brother. See them as real. All right? See them within their reality of who they are and the innocence of who they are. That's what Spirit said to me, right? And then I don't have the judgment. Because what causes pain? If we judge another person, we're judging ourselves. That's what A Course in Miracles that's what Course in Miracles talks about. So that's kind of the experience. So again, the script is in the past. How is it that we're going to interpret this? So what's important then? Infinite possibilities by releasing the script. So what do I get to learn from this situation? Well, I get to learn that previous to this, all the previous break-ins to my car had taken place during the evening, overnight. So I had this assumption that it was okay to store things in my car the windows are tinted, it was in the back seat. I tried to cover it up. But, that things could, people may be tempted by things that are in your car even during the daytime. Doesn't matter, right? So now, it's just a practical thing about living in a city, or anywhere that, like they say, if you're going to leave things exposed in your car, that you may be tempting someone to take them. So, you just know that. So now I am more careful, very practical, right? I'm not living without any sense of awareness, but now I know that it's possible that things may be taken. And so I'm much more conscious of taking my backpack with me now, wherever I go. So me and my backpack are now very close companions. Okay, so this is just kind of one example. I look at the other thing I would like to address too is some infinite possibilities that I myself have experienced, and as everyone knows, or a lot of people know that. Part of my professional life, what I do is I'm a teacher. I teach students with special needs. And at the beginning of the year, I'm a department head, and it's a lot of students, a lot of people that I supervise. And the beginning of the year is always challenging. It's an organizational nightmare, okay, because of I don't need to get into details, but it's very, very challenging. And so I'm often overwhelmed. And what I've noticed as I become a better course student is that I become less overwhelmed. And I was just thinking for this talk that this is the script that the ego tells me. All right? Now the ego says I can be happy if the students that day are engaged and appear to be learning. I work closely with parents. And it says, if the parents express appreciation, then I can be happy. If I see a student progressing, I can be happy. If my paperwork is caught up on, which is never, I can be happy. If there's a fight, if my classroom is getting along, then I can be happy. If my supervisor praises me, I can be happy. If my case managers that work under me meet their deadlines, I can be happy. Now, If any of those things aren't taking place, if the students look at me like they're bored stiff, if the parents express displeasure with me, if the students appear not to be progressing, if my paperwork is not caught up, if there's a fight in my class, which there was 2 Fridays ago, if my supervisor criticizes me, or if the students don't do well in their tests, then I should not be happy. That's what my ego script is telling me. Now, as I've done this work, I've realized that, okay, none of these things can be happening all at once. It's a perceptual world. Some days the students are not going to be happy. Some days they're not going to be engaged. Parents are often not going to be happy with how things are going, for whatever reason. My supervisor is not always going to be engaged. My case managers that I supervise are often not going to meet their deadlines. That's the reality of it. So, my choice is, how can I respond to that? This is what A Course in Miracles says. Forgiveness is the only road that leads out of disaster, past all suffering, and finally, away from death. So, my script, the script that the ego tells me, is not true. And if I'm going through the day, and I'm feeling anxious and upset because these different benchmarks aren't being met, then that's because I'm listening to the ego. And sometimes I think that we can measure our spiritual progress not by how the events of the world are going, whether it's our national world, our city world, or our personalized world, where most of us reside. You don't measure it by that. I think you measure your progress by how quickly you're willing to ask the Holy Spirit to help you understand what is going on in your life and how to respond to that. That is a measure of spiritual progress. And so I'm grateful for myself in the sense that what I experience from that is the infinite possibility of peace and joy, because I know that infinite patience always leads to immediate effects. If I want to understand the personal criticism in that moment, if I want to understand my supervisor criticizing me, or a personal relationship not going the way that I want, as being bad, as being something I should feel guilty about, then that's a choice that I make. However, if I open myself up to accepting the atonement, to accepting forgiveness, then I have infinite possibilities. One thing that I've been doing lately in my practice of A Course in Miracles is that in the morning I try to set an intention. Besides doing the lesson, I also say, okay, it says in the text, ask for the kind of day that you want. And so I say, okay, Holy Spirit, please come into my heart and my mind, and I want to experience a day of forgiveness. I want to experience a day of good order. I want to experience a day of productivity, of gentle honesty. These are some of the things that I've done. And what I found is that more and more I'm responding with spirit than I am with the ego. Not all the time, okay? It doesn't happen all the time. Oftentimes at the end of the day I'm kind of overwhelmed or stressed, but even then I can respond by doing something that is getting me back to spirit. So that's important. I'll share this one thing with you that talk about infinite possibilities. You see, infinite possibilities doesn't mean that we have to conquer the world. It doesn't mean that we have to be a success in the eyes of the world. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. So at the end of the month, I'm going to be 52. And for 52 years, I have struggled with organizational kinds of issues. Namely, ever since I've been a kid, my room has been kind of a disaster. It's cluttered, let's put it that way, okay? 52 year we're talking about, right? And recently, not all the time, but once in a while, I pray in the morning, you know, and I say, you know, I told like good, you know, I ask for good order or organization, and I say, Holy Spirit, can I have the gift of organization? Now, Reverend Tony is familiar with my room, and I had been, my mom had moved a couple years back, and from New Jersey to Florida, and so she sent me, she had been storing some of my stuff, so she sent me like my mom does, she hangs on to these things, you know, forever. So I had like all these memorabilia books, all this kind of stuff she sent me for years. And so I had this whole corner of my room, you know, my room, my 12 by 12 room is my existence, right? That's the space that I have. And I had this whole corner by my bookcase that for a year been sitting there, cluttered. Right? And then suddenly I got the inspiration about 2 weeks ago. And the inspiration was, you know, go buy some of those plastic bins, go through the stuff, keep what you want, and the other stuff just let go. And then suddenly I had this idea that I could stack them next to I had this little closet, I think they called it armoire or something, and I could store it right there. And so I went through the stuff, I stored it, and now my room is clean for the first time in 52 years. So, what I really want to say about infinite possibilities by relieving the script, it really is about accepting the atonement, accepting forgiveness, and being willing to, in both big ways and small ways, to turn over our ideas about ourselves and our world and our lives to the Holy Spirit. And what I can tell you from my own experience is that you will have infinite possibilities will come to you. Many gifts will come to you in the form of peace and love and brotherhood, and just in the way your life then seems to work. And that's my talk for today.